I say in the old days, in the first 1950, the cameras that we would use at NBC were big RCA, whatever the number, whatever they were called, but they were big and cumbersome and hard to move around. You didn't have the cranes and the things that you have today, where you place a small camera, which is what we use today. You can swing them around. In those days, none of that. And you had a turret lens. And the problems that we faced so much of the time was getting caught going between lens, turret, you'd crank that way. The new lens would come up. You crank it some more, another lens. You have a 50 millimeter, of 75 millimeter, and then it would go up to long lenses. But we would have to crank them. And so much now, never like the zoom was just the greatest thing that could have happened to some of us who were doing things ad lib when we were doing things that weren't rehearsed and you were catching stuff on the fly. Zoom, you can go wrong with. You zoom it in and whatever. These other things, we get caught in the middle of guys cranking from lens to lens, and you'd see, those are the early days of television, and there was a lot of that. And it was very, very distracting and
when you would be caught from one lens to the next lens,
go through
next
black.
Lens would be out of focus, right?
Sure. And a hole. I mean, the lens would be like this, and then you go through some black, and you'd get to the next one like this. A whole different picture. Yeah, and out of focus. If you're going into the long lens thing, you're terribly out of focus. But and that only did happen with shows that were the shows that didn't that you wouldn't rehearse. I mean, we never really had a problem other than football games. It would always happen in football games. Want to get in tight, you go through can't zoom, no zooms. There were two lenses. One lens that we used mostly in those days to move on. You were on a dolly, you'd use a 50 or a 75 millimeter lens, which meant that you'd stayed in focus much of the time because they were so wide. They were wide as you went in, wide. And everything was wide. That is, you go in like this, the background stayed in focus, person in the foreground was in focus. That was on a 50 or a 75. A 75 was a preferable lens because it made your face look better. The 50 was a little distorted, and it made you squat. Remember those days when people said they looked so short on? Well, it was because of the lenses, and and as I say, the 50 was a distortion lens. Then we also used 35 millimeter lenses, which were really distortion, but you use those for effect, or we did mostly for effect. You went tight, and the face would do funny things, But we would use two lenses that you could move on, a 50 and a 75, and then two longer lenses, a 135 and a 7-inch or something like this, as I recall.